I'm here all week, so here we go. Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to speak to Bill 13, the Regulated Professions Neutrality Act. I'm opposed to this bill. Surprise, surprise. I guess my biggest concern is really that the government appears to be overreaching again into a space that does not require government interference or intervention. So by dictating to regulatory bodies what they can do to ensure all of their members meet their defined codes of conduct and external communications, they're also overreaching by telling these same regulatory bodies what courses they cannot require for professional integrity. And in my humble opinion, Madam Speaker, professional regulatory bodies are the ones who are best suited to determine what is or is not appropriate behaviour for their members. In thinking about this bill and its implications, I reflected a little on what is a professional regulatory body? Why do they have them? Why is this a good thing? Why do they matter? So, according to the Alberta government webpage, regulatory bodies set standards of practice and qualifications for profession, occupation, or trade. They license and certify members of over 170 different organizations in the province. And so there will be 170 plus organizations that will be impacted by this bill. They're held to, regulatory bodies in general are held to a series of standards and practices to ensure equity between organizations, fairness, and most importantly, transparency for members belonging to these associations and for the public. This is a good thing, Madam Speaker. These regulatory bodies ensure consistency among practitioners so that all members are representing the profession in a way that is defined by the regulatory body to be professional and accountable. These bodies ensure transparency for the public and members. There's a very clear set of rules and criteria to belong to these professional organizations that anybody, either members or the public, can see. And so if you call a lawyer and they're part of a professional lawyer association, you know what you're getting. If you call a lawyer and they're not part of that association, then you may have different questions to ask them if they're going to do work for you. Like, why are they practicing law? Regulatory bodies help establish best practices that people can rely on. And these regulatory bodies, Madam Speaker, are designed to hold their members accountable. They are the ones that know how to do this best because they are the professionals in the given sector. The government does not know or should not know or even really need to have an opinion about how to hold professional members accountable if they belong to one of their own professional organizations. Now, I listened to some of the debate from the other night on this bill, and I know that the government will say that this is about free speech and ensuring that people like the Jordan Petersons of the world can say whatever it is that's on their mind in their personal time and not be reprimanded or held accountable, frankly, by their professional association. There is a difference between free speech and professional credibility, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But right now, I will just say that I do find it a little bit rich that this government has created a bill that's about free speech when they have instigated the notwithstanding clause 4 times this last month that takes away people's rights, Madam Speaker. And so it is really, really rich that the UCP dare sit there, Madam Speaker, and talk about free speech when, by applying the notwithstanding clause, they remove teachers' right to assembly and strike, and they have removed rights of our most vulnerable youth. So this bill isn't about free speech, Madam Speaker. It's a volley to their base, who is using fear of some kind of woke agenda conspiracy rather than actually taking the time to understand what professional bodies do and who they are. Jordan Peterson was disciplined by his regulatory body in Ontario. That's the right of the regulatory body, to discipline members for engaging in not professional conduct and misrepresenting the profession, even in their spare time. Jordan Peterson appealed this decision in courts and eventually won when he got to the Supreme Court, Madam Speaker. What I want to highlight there is that there is a legal process in existence if people feel that they are being unfairly or unjustly muzzled, so to speak, and that legal process already exists. So this bill is redundant and unnecessary, frankly, which is also ironic because that tends to be what the members opposite say every time we propose an amendment, is that it's redundant, and yet here we are with the whole entire bill, which is kind of redundant because there's already a legal process for this. So I want to talk a little bit, Madam Speaker, about the Alberta Society of Professional Biologists. That's the one I'm the most familiar with as a biologist. I used to be a member of the ASPB. I am not anymore because I'm not a practicing biologist anymore. I'm just an MLA, I guess, now. Just an MLA. The Alberta Society of Professional Biologists has a very stringent criteria in order to apply and to receive the designation of being a professional biologist. There's a number of years of service, minimum years of education, and you can mix and match. You don't have to have a PhD or a master's, but you do need to be able to demonstrate competence in biology as a profession to be considered a professional biologist. Professional biologists are monitored and they report to the ASPB. There's an annual general meeting. I was just there last Friday to serve as a keynote speaker, Madam Speaker, which is kind of fun. And this is really important because if you're a company hiring a biologist to do an assessment as part of your development permits or requirements, you want to know that the person who comes to you is a biologist, not just a person who likes to spend time outside or somebody who's worked on a farm for a long time, but somebody who actually is trained as a biologist. And so we know that that kind of definition and that approval is really important. This last week, in my keynote to the ASPB conference, I focused on science and politics and credibility, because there's this idea that scientists can't be advocates because it sacrifices their scientific credibility. Science is supposed to be objective. Advocacy inherently implies a position or a statement. So what is important here is that the professional credibility is, when it's tied to the Society of Professional Biologists, there is an organization that is helping back you up. So science is objective. The methods used are objective. The analyses are objective. But oftentimes, especially in conservation biology, the recommendations stemming from that work may not be totally neutral. They are advocating for the application of the data and the analysis to land use and wildlife decision-making. Scientists can still retain credibility by advocating for the application of robust science and decision-making, but the organization, the ASPB, actually protects individuals if they have that credibility. And when individuals say something that questions their own professional credibility, it in turn feeds back on the credibility of the Alberta Society of Professional Biologists and the field of biology as a whole. So I'll give you an example, Madam Speaker. I'm a grizzly bear biologist, and grizzly bears are listed as threatened. They have certain habitat requirements that are based on science. There's abundant science showing us what we need to do to recover grizzly bears. If I was in a media interview, Madam Speaker, and I recommended that people should go hug a bear because they're super cute and fluffy, that would go against science. It would definitely go against data. And there's not really a space for a professional biologist to be a professional biologist and recommend that people go cuddle a bear. Even though I can tell you there have been plenty of times when I'm outside that they're just so darn cute, and I really wouldn't mind just giving them a little scritchy behind the ear. But I have never done that, because obviously that would be bad. But if I went and publicly said, I think everybody should hug a bear, my credibility as a biologist would come into question, and then therefore the ASPB would have within their rights to say, Sarah, what are you doing? Professional biologists should not go running around advocating to hug bears.
Honourable member, I may caution against use of names in this House, even if it is your own.
My apologies, Madam Speaker. They would say member, because that's what they all call me. So there's a difference here between free speech versus being a responsible biologist or a responsible professional. The ASPB should be the one to discipline this kind of thing, if I ever did that. And while there is a difference between personal time and professional time, I think it is important as professionals that we consider how other people see us. We are all politicians. We are incredibly sensitive to who we stand in photos with, what we say publicly, even on our off time, Madam Speaker. The public is who holds us accountable if we step out of line in that regard, but professional societies do and should be the organizations to hold professionals accountable outside of that space. I want to spend a little bit of time also talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. So this bill limits a regulatory body's ability to promote, affirm, or make policies that incorporate DEI. The member from Cypress Medicine Hat last week, in his description of DEI, demonstrated exactly why this kind of training is important. The government wants to make it sound like DEI is an ideology, when really it's about creating a more empathetic, learned society that operates with more compassion. In an organization I worked for before I came here, I implemented a DEI program that was meant to engage people of color, Black, Indigenous, and people of color into our organization to become members. Because I realized that there probably were people of color who were biologists, but they were not represented in our organization. To me, one of the great things about DEI is that it's trying to create an organization where people can see themselves reflected, so they may want to pursue that career or vocation. As a woman in STEM, Madam Speaker, at the beginning of my career, I was frequently the only woman in the room. I would walk into a room with stakeholders or other scientists, and I would be the only woman in there. I don't want other women to be the only woman in the room anymore, Madam Speaker. I want them to see other strong women who are representing women. And I want them to be in the room. Since then, I've done multiple unconscious bias and inclusion courses. I can tell you that these courses have not changed my ideology or changed how I think about my political leanings at all, Madam Speaker. The point of these courses is to imagine the world through someone else's eyes and to recognize that everybody has a different lived experience. This isn't some grand conspiracy to make everyone an extreme leftist. The fact that the government creates a bill to address this made-up problem is a waste of resources and makes them appear so afraid of learning new things that even trying to imagine that someone else is living a different life is impossible. I guess that's why they're taking away trans rights. If it doesn't affect them, then it must not matter. And that, Madam Speaker, is a real shame, because there's a lot of people who live in Alberta who come from a wide array of backgrounds and lived experiences. The more we learn about the rest of the people, or all of the people in our society, the better we're able to govern, the better we're able to be professionals in our chosen fields, because all of that information helps us communicate more effectively with people who come from a different background than we do. And that inclusion is really important. The unconscious bias piece, Madam Speaker, we all have unconscious bias. Learning to recognize it and understand it is a really important part, I think, of growing as a person, growing as an adult, being a better parent, being a better friend, being a better wife sometimes. I mean, it is good to understand where my husband's coming from. And so we learn and we strive to become better people, better, yeah.